You are watching Stellar.
Hi, everyone. My name is Wendy LeBeau from Stellar, and welcome to our Women in Leadership on Livestreaming chat. I'm so happy that we have so many people here today. I want to introduce my co-host, Amy Graca.
Hello.
Amy is Vice President of Ticketing for Caesars Entertainment in Las Vegas. Amy, welcome.
Thank you. Hello, everyone. It's great to be here. Wendy, thank you so much for inviting me to co-host with you today. I couldn't be more excited to talk about streaming and what this looks like as we're all so anxiously awaiting to get back to live entertainment across what it is we do.
I couldn't agree more, and it's so amazing to have these incredible women as our guests. And this is one of 4 sessions that we're going to do throughout the year, highlighting amazing women in the live entertainment space. So before we get any further, let me, Richard, can you bring up all of our amazing guests? Hi, everyone.
Good morning.
Hi. Good morning.
Good morning.
Good morning. Thank you all. And Amy, thank you again, everyone, for being here. I'm going to quickly go around and do introductions so we can just get into the conversation of live streaming, the past, the present, and the future. I first want to introduce Diane Paulus. Diane is the Terry and Bradley Bloom Artistic Director at ART at Harvard University. She will be directing 1776 coming up. Broadway credits include Jagged Little Pill, 15 Tony Award nominations, Waitress, and so many more. She also did the Jagged live stream, which was so exciting. So welcome, Diane. Thank you for coming.
Thank you. Great to be here.
I also want to introduce Rachel Fink, and she is the executive director of Looking Glass Theater Company. She's been there since 2018. She was also the managing director of Theater Bay Area, and she was with Berkeley Rep for 16 years. Thank you, Rachel, so much for being here.
Thanks. I'm really excited about our conversation.
And Adila Barnes, welcome. Adila is the co-founder of the Los Angeles Women's Theater Festival. She actually has a show live streaming. Her festival starts tonight, so thank you for being here.
Welcome.
She is an actor on stage and screen, and she's an author, and she's an activist. And this is the 28th year of the Los Angeles Women's Theater Festival. That's correct, right?
That's correct.
Wonderful. Thank you. Thank you for being here, Adila.
It's my pleasure.
And then Elizabeth Vincentelli. She is a regular contributor to the culture pages of the New York Times with a focus on theater, streaming in all shapes and forms. She also contributes to the New Yorker and is one of the founders and hosts of a very popular podcast. So definitely has been in the kind of virtual space with 3 on the aisle. And thank you, Elizabeth, for being here.
Well, thank you.
And again, I'm Wendy from Stellar, and I'm gonna let Amy take the conversation.
Sure. Absolutely. Again, thank you everyone for being here. It's great to be able to have this conversation with you today. I also want to just mention to everyone watching today, if you have questions at any point in time, please feel free to go ahead and comment in the comment section, and we will certainly try to get to as many as we can here throughout, and then leave some time at the end to answer some questions too. So let's get right into this. It's such an interesting topic. I really want to start with, in no particular order, what was everyone's organization or you as individuals thinking about streaming pre-COVID? How has that changed, obviously, in COVID, and kind of talking about then what's happening going into the future months? So anybody can start, no particular order.
Well, being the Aries that I am, I'll just kick it off. In the case of the Los Angeles Women's Theater Festival, We hadn't really thought seriously about pivoting to live streaming. But when COVID hit, and that was 2 weeks before our 27th annual festival, we had to cancel. It was like we were dressed up and had nowhere to go. So we then realized that the world was changing and that we had to do something different. So it took us a couple of months to find our groove. And then in June, we began programming in terms of live streaming. And we actually did 6 programs in 2020 starting in June, which averages almost one a month. And so that's how we addressed it. We realized at that point that we had to really get on board with technology in a way that we had not before.
So you pivoted pretty quickly then. I mean, being that, you know, essentially COVID started, we're using March as that timeline from last year, but you pivoted pretty quickly then.
About 3 months later, yes.
Wow.
And once you made the decision, Adila, like how many weeks or months did it take you to get the planning in place to get your first event online?
Well, that's an interesting question because we receive the primary source of our funding comes from government granting, City of Los Angeles, LA County Arts and Culture, City of Culver City, City of West Hollywood, etc. So we had commitments to do a festival. They had given us an award for 2027, for 2020. And so we had to figure out, well, how in the heck are we going to do this? Because we've already received some of our monies in advance and we don't have a festival. We don't have a product. And so fortunately, with one of the grants, with the City of Los Angeles Cultural Affairs, we had written in our grant proposal that we would also offer a free workshop, a solo workshop. So they said, we know you can't do the festival, but how about you go ahead and just do the workshop, do it virtually. And we said, oh, okay. So that's what kicked us off in June to satisfy the grant with the City of Los Angeles. We presented something that was part of our proposal in the beginning, and they were kind enough to allow that to be enough to suffice getting the rest of our grant.
Oh, wow, that's really interesting.
Thank God.
I can jump in here. I think in response to that question, we were not thinking about live stream at all, to be totally honest. Live stream was, you know, I think in the consciousness mostly like the Met does it, the Metropolitan Opera, and you know, is that working? It seems to be working, but that was, you know, a really special deal that Peter Gelb was able to craft with his unions, and you know, that's just not what we do in the theater. And it's been remarkable, this moment of, you know, extreme disruption and what it has caused, I think, for every institution, you know, looking inwards to everything about our practice, financial, audience, reckoning with anti-racism and equity issues, all of this kind of happening over the course of this year. A flash forward, I feel like live streaming, now I can't think of doing anything without live streaming. So that's the bookend of thinking it was not part of the discussion to now, as we're looking forward to being live next season, the second word out of my mouth is, well, we'll definitely be live streaming that, right? And at ART, we're also in the process of planning a new building that is due to come online in a couple of years. So we've also been in a pandemic in a building project and going through all that interrogation through what it means to bring a new physical space into the world and what we want it to represent in terms of our values. But I was in a conversation yesterday with Michael Bobbitt, who was the artistic director of New Rep in the Boston area and now is the new executive director of the Massachusetts Cultural Council. And we were talking, and he was saying, yeah, the future is definitely going to be every theater. Like, just close your eyes, transport yourself a couple of years. Every theater is going to have the cameras. Every theater is going to have the technology. I mean, the technology is here. It's happened. We've had this accelerated experience of it. we usually move with technology, right? We don't keep our CD Walkmans anymore. We've moved on. We keep moving with technology. So I think the theater's never had to deal with it. And I get it, right? We're all so busy, so overworked, just delivering a good show. There's no bandwidth for that. This disruption has forced us to face it. And now I think the critical moment's going to be how, as an industry, are we going to embrace this major opportunity for additional, earned revenue, and probably most significantly, access to audience and a wider reach. But really hard for institutions right now when we're all grappling with a loss of income and hurting so much financially. It's a crossroads of this moment of growth that we need to make, but we have to make it with an investment, right?
Well, and with very little data to support our decisions. And I know, one of the questions we're going to get into a little bit, and we can pivot a little now to talk about this too, is, the pricing side of it that I'm truly vested in. I say figuring it out, but interested to hear what everyone's been doing. Certainly we've all seen a lot of free live streams this year, this year. And now moving into, Diane, what you just mentioned about really being able to capture that upside, or this is now a real live opportunity for another revenue stream. And so what does that look like? I'd love to hear your thoughts on how you came up with your model as you're moving into this space.
Yeah, I mean, we're figuring it out is the answer. And you're so right about the data, because the data, you also have to resource finding the data. That's bandwidth, time, all of that. But I have a HBS professor on my board. And early on, he was like, you people have to stop giving away all of this content. I mean, he just said it to me. He was like, what are you doing? Your industry is, everything's free. It's just way too free. Stop it, And I understood the impulse. In the beginning, it was everything. It wasn't just live streaming. It was just Zoom webinars, people, actors.
We were panicking.
Right.
Exactly. And
good point, Rachel.
And we had to stay connected. Mm-hmm. Artists needed to just feel alive and able to connect with our audiences. So that was a phase. But it's a big question. And I'd love to hear the others comment on it, because it's a very interesting thing. The live stream arena feels very much like making theater and marketing just live theater, right? You just because it's live streaming, it's accessible and maybe it's less expensive, doesn't mean people are going to buy into it, right? We've experienced that at ART, putting out all sorts of different things, some pre-recorded, some live stream on demand, some programmed at 7:30 at night, like a regular theater program, like trying to experiment to see what gets the audience. And so, it's not that easy. That the marketing piece of this is as significant as what it is to sell a theater that's live in a room in a theater. So anyway, love to hear others' take on this.
Yeah. Rachel, why don't you jump in?
Sure. As I open my mouth. I feel like we have 5 years of experimentation, and also at least our approach. And to go give a little context, Looking Glass is an ensemble-based company. We have 29 artists who help, or not even help. They choose what our artistic product is. And there's a real specific vetting process and development process that those works go through. So for us as a company, this was a really strong shift from what our past practices, not to say that it wasn't a strong shift from other people or for other companies. And so once we kind of got through the initial shock of the moment, as well as, think it kind of putting on some I can't think of the the right metaphor. We were getting a lot of noise, a lot of well-intentioned noise from lots of people of what are great ideas and things to do to pivot. And so we had to turn that off and figure out what was really best artistically and in a mission-driven way for our company. And where we've come through is still staying connected to the intimacy, to the physicality, to the circus-based nature of the work that we do, but really thinking about the film stream thing as like a different medium that we're working in, and that is something that is happening parallel, or will be, and will continue to happen parallel to the work that we will be doing in our stage whenever we're back in our stage. And in that way, it helps a little bit in thinking about, like, that's going to have different behavior patterns. That's going to have a different pricing model. That's going to have different, we don't want to have different artistic expectations, because of course we don't want to create a weird dynamic between the different offerings that we have. But in our approach to it, we can't just assign, and this is something certainly that I talk to our board about a lot, our experience and preconceived notions of what happens when you go to an experience of walking in a theater and giving your ticket and watching the show and sitting there for 3 hours, talking too fast, communing in space with people. Like, it is a different thing when you have a household who might be in their pajamas, having a glass of wine and popcorn, putting something on pause, coming back. Like, that is a different thing. And so we have to, over time, create different language and expectations for that. And we are just at the beginning of it. And that's where the research and data will continue to be so helpful as we experiment and are open about experimenting and learn from it.
I'm curious, Rachel, with the stuff you've done, like, over the holidays, did you feel like you were able to grasp a new audience with live streaming? And if you have any data points on that,
Yes.
I'm putting you on the spot.
No, I prepared some because I thought you might ask. So we took which was a great experiment for us. We had done a holiday show, The Steadfast Tin Soldier by Mary Zimmerman, in person in our theater for the past 2 years. We had an incredible, luscious capture of it. And so we were able to put that up on and stream that. And while certainly, like, the price points don't really compare in terms of the accessibility, about 75% of those households who turned in were completely new to file. So those are like new eyeballs, new relationships, which was so and is so exciting for us. And of course, we were able to, reach, I think it was 45 different states. That would not have happened before. We reached into a couple countries. I'm sure my other colleagues on this have similar experiences. Like, for us, one of the greatest things about streaming is the accessibility and the ability to be able to grow relationships. Certainly, we want to have deep relationships with our home base and with the city of Chicago. That's where our home is. That's where we're born. But to be able to also share art and go beyond that is something that I think is the most exciting for us.
That is an amazing data point. And I've heard that from other organizations too. And that is just like such a reason to be doing this, to just open your audience up. I also think, Rachel, what you did with Steadfast, which is you took a pre-recorded show, and instead of just making it a VOD, like video on demand, you actually created the experience of like a show every night.
Yes.
And I've seen other organizations do this as well on Stellar and see the revenue be a lot greater than just a traditional VOD. So kudos to you for trying something different with that, where people could have that experience of even with a pre-recorded show.
What we found is that still creating at least the semblance of an event was really important in being able to achieve exactly what you talked about. And what was fun is that, and we certainly encourage this, folks would take pictures on and post on Instagram, sitting around with their kids and getting ready for the event of watching Steadfast Tin Soldier on the big screen TV. Like, and it's a family. It's not a children's show. It's a show for all ages. But the ability that multi-generations could experience it together at the same time, particularly in this moment, or in that moment in December when we were so separated, was really a powerful, powerful thing that we were so excited that we could offer and participate in.
It's wonderful.
And what type of financial, how did you come up with a financial model, Rachel? Like, is there something that you can give an example? Kind of, we're all, I think, starting at this point where do we start? And I want to kind of throw that in there as we talk about these things, because I think that's really helpful for the audience that is watching today too. A lot of our ticketing professionals get these questions from their organizations. And I know I've been talking to a lot of people on how do we start this modeling? Where do we start?
For our experience, there were a couple companies that we knew that had done a version of streaming before us, since there had been essentially 6 to 9 months before we started really setting things. And so we asked what felt like the sweet spot for them for price point. So we did our own like really on the ground dirty research.
Sure.
And we found that the sweet spot for pricing was about $20 or $25. And stuck with that and averaged out. We did some discounting. We like Cyber Monday ended up being a really great discount for us. We had very clear ideas of, we knew what it was going to cost. So we knew what we wanted to achieve in order to at least be able to meet our expenses and hopefully go a little bit over. And that's what we ended up doing. So I think the other thing, of course, as we're learning is that, our first effort, we did not make huge money off of this, but we set up other markers of hopefully success and learnings that we developed from that we can apply to the future. But the financial relationship between income and expense is, at least for us, was dramatically different than when we were selling tickets in the theater.
Got it. Elizabeth, I'd love to know your journey because you just like how you discovered this and you come at from a very different perspective as well.
Well, I started for the past year. I've been writing a bi-weekly column for the New York Times about streaming. So I've acquired a pretty good bird's eye view of what's going on in the US. I mean, not just in the US, but all over the world, because I've listed shows from everywhere. So I've been doing it twice a month for a year. And I think I was one of the first to write back last March 2020 about some of the legal issues and some of the paradigm shifting that was happening when we were not even realizing what's happening. And I distinctly remember in March 2020 talking to people who license shows and ticketing organization, and they were like, we need to find a way to streamline the process. So for instance, people who want to get into live streaming can, and this was really affecting schools, for instance, colleges and even high schools. And they were actually at the vanguard of that stuff. They were thinking, okay, we need to streamline the process and make sure that when you get the licensing right for a show, now those include streaming rights. That was totally new a year ago. Nobody had thought about that. So now they were starting to bundle things, and this is very like nuts and boltsy, but I find it fascinating. So they were starting to bundling, licensing rights and streaming rights, and then they would have like also integrate like ticketing. So you would have like a one-stop shop, and that really grew. And for a lot of people, once you got out of the schools and into professional theaters, in America, a lot more than in Europe, there was this sense that making your stuff available everywhere would cannibalize audiences. That word kept coming back. We can't do it. We're going to cannibalize. That's why the US was way behind England, for instance, because streaming had long been a part of funding. Like if you were applying for government money in England, you had to have in your plan, in your application, they would ask specifically, do you have any plans to make this accessible via streaming or recording or capture? We were way behind on that. That's why they had all these great shows available. That's only we were like, mind blown. Look at this production they've been sitting on, and now we can see them too.
Yeah, that whole National Theater like library, which is like Netflix, like that they've been
and
working on for years.
The globe, they all have this, and that's because it was part of the funding. They had to do that. So we were way behind. We're catching up, but we're starting from behind. And then, of course, there was a whole issues I never really thought about. Like you got into discussions about, okay, so does it mean the actor now should belong to equity or SAG-AFTRA? How does it work? Like there were all these legal things that we had never, in the theater industry, I never really had to think about, and then we did, and I think it's been a kind of good kick in the pants, I think. But so it's been really an eye-opening thing, and I've been following that. I wrote a whole article about the theater scene in Dallas. I have never been to Dallas outside of the airport, and I was able to do a whole article about this because it was all streaming, and I think that's been fantastic. And I would say some of the initiatives all over the country have been really inventive and creative. Some people were doing pods way before people were talking about pods, creative pods. So I think it's been a great, well, clearly there's a huge economic impact that is not great at all. I don't want to make it sound like it's been, super fun, but it's creating, I think it's opening new avenues for people to think about theater in a new way. And I do agree that access is a huge part of it. Physical, financial, and I really also think it is not cannibalizing audiences. And I think there's more and more research coming out now that shows that it's creating demand. It is not stifling, it is creating it. I think the more people see Hamilton on Disney, the more people that want to see it for real, not less. It's creating demand. So in that way, I think it's really changed the way we think about how we deal with preserving and making available the theater experience. It's not instead of, it's in addition to.
That's really interesting, Elizabeth. Amy, did you have anything you were jumping in?
No, I completely agree. And I think looking back, and Diane, you mentioned this kind of, if you close your eyes and you think, okay, what is the future? It's really no different than what's been happening in so many of these, dare I say, silos, where if you go to a baseball game, I go to Wrigley Field because I want to feel that feeling, right? When I walk in and you buy the hot dog and you smell the, popcorn and you hear the organ playing, but it doesn't mean that I still don't watch all the Cubs games on TV, every other day of the week, or whenever that schedule is that year. And I think that's what we're going to see in the future for, live entertainment. And Elizabeth, I totally agree with you. I don't think we're going to cannibalize. In fact, the reach is going to be that much further.
And I think, Amy, just to jump in there with your analogy to sports, and I completely agree with Elizabeth. It's not in place of, it's a hybrid, it's a corollary. And the more we flex our muscles, the more we, get rid of all the kind of roadblocks. But on the sports thing, what is also exciting about thinking about the future is, when you choose to watch a game at home, you're also getting the commentator. And you're getting things that you don't always get, and so I'm really curious about that. Like, what is going to be that choice of, sure, I want to physically get my body there and be in it, and that's one experience. But the other experience of watching something, I had this incredible experience of actually meeting someone just this last week who had seen Jagged Little Pill 3 times at the ART. She lost her hearing when she was 7 years old, and in year, I think 2000, she went completely blind. And she had come to see the show, and she told me about the audio description experience, right? So she was physically present, and she saw it once, and then she came back a second time, and then she came to one of our audio described performances where there is someone live whispering into her ear. She's getting up, she's walking over to the couch, she's putting her foot on the couch, she's jumping, and like, I was so fascinated. And she told me how, when her friend said, oh, I wish you could see it. She's like, no, I saw everything, and I was thinking about this audio description and just that presence of a voice kind of, so you're listening and you're seeing, but you're getting an audio description of it. I was so moved by her testimony, and it just made me think about all the ways in which we can increase the experience of theater and bring it to so many more folks. I think that so many aspects of access, thinking about, thinking a lot about theater as healing and what we are all going to do in this industry coming out of this pandemic, and how the theater is going to help deal with these massive traumas of social isolation and anxiety, and how can we help through the arts? And it might not be that people want to even go into a theater for a while, right? Just right. Even when we have our protocols and it's safe and everyone's vaccinated, I can really imagine the anxiety around that. So how can we reach that audience and kind of help with all of that ritual movement back into out of this pandemic, and thinking about all the technology that can help us do that?
I really like what you're saying there. I just feel it's almost like we need to create, like we haven't yet created what the next thing is with live streaming, which is super exciting. Like, what will that look like, in the next 3 months? I'm kind of
more than 3 months though, Wendy. Yeah. I feel like in 10, 15, 20 years, people are going to be having these types of conversations, talking about this group of us, right? Meaning the industry that is leading this effort for the next 20 plus years.
Listen, in 5 years, you'll be talking about like having chips implanted in your brain so you can experience I don't want to think about like in 5 years, that's where we'll be.
I know. I always feel like, I don't know, I'm old enough that like the early days of cable has meaning to me. And I sort of feel like we're all going to look back at the spirit of the pandemic when we did these Zoom webinars, and it was all like in our children's bedrooms and, kitchens, and the sound is bad. And it's going to be like the early days of like cable television, because the technology is going to get better really quickly, right? We know that.
I want to comment on a couple of things. I've been muted because with my AOL, I keep hearing these clicks every time somebody sends me an email, click. So we've been muting me, so I haven't been in terms of just being organic. So I unmuted me so I can get back in, and then I'll mute me, so I'll go back and forth. But I wanted to address a couple of things, and one is revenue and ticket pricing. That's really an important issue, because the question is, how much do you ask people to pay live streamed events when they can get all this free content? Because as someone was saying, in the early days, everybody was free. It was like, we got to keep going. We're essential workers. We're first responders as artists. We've got to heal spirits. We got to deal with the soul. We got to reflect what society is feeling right now. We've got to be the voice. So let's do it free. We got to do it. We got to do it. And so now I think we're in a place where we're like, okay, that was stage one, but we've got to keep our doors open. We can't keep doing everything for free. We've got to pay whatever our expenses are. So the question for us, with our annual festival that begins tonight, our 28th annual festival, and Still We Rise is our theme, we had to look at that. We said, okay, normally our ticket prices in a live theater are maybe $25, $30, right? And for our Champagne Gala and Award Ceremony, that's going to be tonight. It'll be a virtual Champagne Gala and Award Ceremony. Normally the tickets are like $45, $50, 2 for $90 kind of thing. And we said, we better do some research and see what people are charging. We can't necessarily do the same thing that we used to do. And so in the research, we saw that prices for events were anywhere from free to maybe about 20, pushing it, maybe 25. And so we decided that we would just do $15 because we're thinking volume, accessibility. That would be the early bird price per show, because we have 6 programs starting tonight through Tuesday. Each one has a different theme, but the overall theme is And Still We Rise. So tonight is Empowered Women, where we are honoring 5 awardees, including posthumously Miss Diane Carroll. So normally that event is at a theater, it's catered, everybody's dressed up, now we're in our homes, people are in pajamas and slippers, and it's like, well, how do we do this? So we said, okay, well, we can't go less than $25 for the gala, regardless. And for the single tickets, we'll do an early bird for $15, then there'll be 20. So that feels competitive in the world that we're in now, although it's not necessarily what it would have been if we were in a live theater. And yet we want to make sure that people come, because one of the challenges I've seen with the live streaming that we're doing is that you may have less people who join you. So for us, it's more about bringing people in, having the bodies on the sofas, in the beds, wherever they are. That's where it is right now. And so I think that that's something that has to be looked at. Revenue. How do you do it?
Adela, I think what you brought up is what I'm seeing a lot of success with event, organizations and producers, and it's the idea of what we do in live, which is scaling our ticket prices. So having packages, having the early bird you mentioned, having like the ability to buy the whole series, having a VIP, champagne delivered to your home. And then one of the earliest features we built out on Stellar was actually a fundraising tool. And the interesting thing is people, obviously accessibility, we want to make sure we can get as many bodies in and keep it open, but there are people who want to donate more. And some of the shows have like doubled, their revenue with donations. And it's been really awesome to see how people want to be so generous and buy the highest ticket price. And so I think you're right. Like it's looking at the product and then scaling your offers. I think Amy and I were talking about this pre-call, like scaling is just a great way to continue both in person and online to make additional revenue.
Right. So we have to figure out how creatively we can still bring in the revenue, though it may not be totally about the ticket price anymore. So for us, we're including a silent auction. So the silent auction, people can bid each of the programs. And then on the last night, on Tuesday night, that's when the silent auction on eBay will end. We're also doing a raffle. People can go to our text to donate up until the last show, and then we'll pull at the last show. But all 6 shows, people can be bidding. So those are a couple of ways that we're adding value in terms of revenue. And then also we were very blessed because of COVID, and I'm sure it's true with other theaters, that there have been grants that have been available that are COVID grants. So some of the revenue perhaps that theaters have lost have really been recouped because of these special grants. And so thank God we've gotten at least 2 of them. So there are different ways people are, doing fundraisers and GoFundMes and what have you. So I think there are ways that we can be creative and not rely as heavily, perhaps, as we used to on ticket prices.
Wendy, can I jump in? Because this, what Adela just described is exactly what our experience has been. And I think it is reflective of this. If we want to call that first moment when we were putting out so much content for free, our first phase, this is our second phase where we have been ticketing or doing fundraisers for individual events. What I am spending a lot of time thinking about and talking with our staff, and definitely have no solutions, is this concept of how this integrates with the concept of subscription, and also not necessarily in our, like, what has been our traditional subscription. You go to 8 shows and you have the same seat every single time, that thing. When with the knowledge that right now we're getting more and more content from digitally on a subscription model that has a monthly price to it, and to the extent that folks are having to decide which of the 15 services do I want to subscribe to so I can get the content that I can trust and that I can put on with 10 o'clock at night when I'm in PJs and a glass of wine. So how does our concept of creating digital content, how is that going to fit into that world as we're moving forward? And as you know, we're hopefully entering this phase when people are now going outside. They're going to be a little less connected to all of their electronic devices, and yet this feels like the next phase. And so I think that that's going to be a really interesting things for us to continue to experiment with, both in terms of the distribution and content delivery, but also in terms of the pricing and how we're packaging our different works of art as we're moving forward.
That's really interesting.
We need to all work together and build a network, the Broadway network, right? And that's how we distribute this at a larger level. That aside, for a second, I wanted to ask you, Rachel, too, from a resource perspective. I think there's this I don't want to say illusion, but thought process perhaps that when you do a live event, it doesn't take as many resources. And I'm finding that that's not at all the case, that it takes a lot of resources. So I think for everyone, kind of, you know, if you can describe the level of effort that it's taking to put on these events, I think that's really helpful for our listeners.
Yes, I mean, you're absolutely right. I mean, our experience is that, yes, it takes an extraordinary amount of resources, and then it has the added layer that, like so many companies, we've downsized. So, you know, come June of last year, we had to lay off about 2/3 of our staff. So that means our remaining staff were taking on the burden of learning something new that was outside of what, frankly, the job was that they had been hired for. And so that there is a cost that in terms of the learning process, there's a cost in terms of allowing, it takes longer, allowing for people to make mistakes. And to learn from them and to apply from them. And so what we had to do in terms of our budgeting process, after we learned the first time, is you know, allow for greater contingency than what we had previously been doing in our budgeting. And I think as we get smarter and move forward, like hopefully that percentage of contingency will go down, but it's real, and it's for those things that we didn't know to think of in our planning, and it tends to be the things that are connected to technology or editing, and at least for us, came up in really close proximity to when we needed to go live. So it was things that you needed to solve it with money. And so we had to make sure that we had set some aside in order to deal with that.
Rachel, you're really on it, because with our festival, here we are, we have 6 programs. Normally we have a director for the Champagne Gala and Award Ceremony tonight. The other 5 shows, we wouldn't have a director. We'd have our co-hosts, our celebrities, we'd have the audience, we have the scripts, and they just follow the scripts. We have the performers, yada, yada, yada. But not the opening number on the gala night with the director. But the other 5 shows, pretty much we can handle without the director being a part of it. Well, now, because we're live streaming, our director now has to direct all 6 shows, because we have to have a script for every single show. We have to rehearse all the performers, the awardees, the co-hosts, so that everybody knows this new system that's new to us, OBS, because we got to be able to acclimate people so they know how to use the technology, how to have a background, where the eye line needs to be, their sound is okay. We've got to pay the OBS technician. We got to pay the director for 6 shows as opposed to 1. It's a whole other ball game. It's a whole other ball of wax. And so the expenses are going up. We're doing a lot more editing. I mean, things that normally in a live theater, we would not have to budget for. So I just really want to co-sign what you're saying, Rachel, because there are things that we had not foreseen that we do have to include. If we're going to use technology, there is no way to get around it. You've got to have the technicians.
That's great. Amy, do you think we should go into questions? I'm seeing some questions come in.
Yeah, no, absolutely. Let's do that for.
Yeah, sorry, I'm just scrolling through really quickly. I know there was a question of, and this came up earlier, and I know there's a lot changing right now too. So I don't know who wants to grab this one, but how did the organizations that stream shows deal with equity and other unions? I know it's a constantly evolving question. If anyone wants to jump in, it's a big one. You probably could have a full session on that specifically. So,
Yes.
but it was the first question I wanted to bring it up.
I'll tackle that one real quickly. In my case, because I'm also a solo artist who's toured, but I'm also an equity member and have been for many years, my show that I've toured like 3 continents, 40 states around the country, I've never had to deal with equity because it's my product. It's my show, even though I'm an equity member. However, I went to my alma mater at UC Santa Cruz and we did use equity. I brought them in to negotiate with the university. So it's gone both ways. And so historically with festivals, we've been exempt from equity. We've never had to worry about it in the 28 years. But now things are changing in terms of technology. Now we're talking about VOD, re-airing the things that have been placed on the internet. So now we're getting into a grayer area. And so I'm not quite sure exactly where we are at this moment. I know there's been a lot going on, a lot of conflict with equity, SAG, and around jurisdiction. So there are things I think that are being worked out, but it is a process because things have changed.
Yeah, I mean, the interesting thing is in theater, an actor's salary is usually dictated by the capacity of the house, at least in the LORT system, right?
Right.
When your capacity of your house through live stream becomes a whole other ballgame over time, right? So that's why SAG has residuals. So I mean, I think it for theaters, the idea that we go through all that investment to make a theatrical product, given the change of technology, we want to be able to continue to earn revenue off that product. But there has to be a system of compensating everybody for that use. So there's got to be some collaboration or understanding on the part of equity to build in the idea of residuals. Mm-hmm. And I think, Elizabeth, what you were saying about what goes on in Europe, it's all got to be negotiated up front. I mean, now when I think about artists coming under contract for ART, I want to immediately turn to my general management and say, well, let's talk about the live capture. Let's talk about the live streaming on opening night. Let's talk about, in perpetuity, how are we upfront dealing with that? But it's going to need to be a real coming together of the unions. And I just hope they come along with us. Early on, we were looking at airing archives, right? Because we've made archives of our production, but we made them under a contract that they were just archival. To air the archive, we had to go to equity, and equity was working with us, but they were computing the cost of how they wanted to compensate actors based on the capacity of your existing theater house, and the number of views you could have had to be based on your LORT size theater, which was so mind-boggling to me, because the whole point of putting it into the internet is that you're not constrained by your physical house size. So it's really a change. I mean, it's a huge change for our
There's also, and to go back to this idea that we're seeing more hybrids. For instance, like last year, you would see a lot of shows or programming that was available for like 4 days, and that had to do with some of the parameters that equity had. You could do 4 days and then it was it, or it had to be a benefit. I mean, it was very strict.
Yeah.
Now what we're seeing now, we're seeing a lot more hybrids. We're seeing, like, what I see a lot of is like a show that will be live streaming for a few performances and then it goes on demand. So it goes from one status to another. Mm-hmm. I haven't really looked deeply into that, but I think that probably entails, I suspect, a change in status and how an offering is classified. So first it's live, then it's on demand until X date for X amount of time. How do you deal with that? And a question actually I have for the people on this call who are involved in like companies is, do you think this is going to make you rethink what the very concept of a season and of a subscription model? Are you rethinking that? Because I think it's going to happen. I think the subscription model in many cases is not working anymore. It's not working the way it's meant to be working. The season, are we going to see more, like a lot of big companies plan years ahead? Are we going to see more last minute, improv? Is it going to be possible to insert something into a season? Are we going to keep on the spring and fall model and maybe a summer thing in between? How is that going to change? Because I think those are all on the table right now, not just, live or streaming, but also, okay, well, do we have seasons? Do we have subscriptions? How does this work?
I'll just say real quick, we're definitely rethinking the idea of season at ART, and just thinking about not deciding things for a whole year, because we've had to do that in the pandemic, just roll out the next 6 months or the next 3 months, or the sort of chunks, which is also more of a European model actually. But I just want to cite one thing we did last December. ART collaborated with Play Company, Woolly Mammoth, The Guthrie, and OSF, 5 theaters. And we did a collaboration on a play, This Is Who I Am, and it was a live stream, right? It was done live at 2 different actors' homes, and it was done on a performance schedule, and all 5 theaters hosted it. This came together in, 2 or 3 months. Like the idea of a 5-play co-production in the old time of like co-productions across geographic cities, and we would have thought the actors are traveling city to city, and that would have been a year at least of pre-planning. So this idea that we were able to be responsive and make it happen, and that project actually delivered 250% off the original box office revenue. So it was very successful. Conservative projections, right? Because we didn't want to get ahead of ourselves. But nonetheless, I think emergent, responsive programming, we've always wanted to do it. I mean, every art institution wants to do it. I talk to people who run museums. They're like, oh, if we could only be more responsive and more emergent. The world, something happens in the world and we want to respond to it. So I think this idea of thinking about the digital live streaming space as the emergent, flexible, pliable, responsive space is a really, really cool idea.
Completely agree.
In the case of the Los Angeles Women's Theater Festival, we've never done seasons. We do have ongoing events. We have the annual festival during Women's History Month in March. We have our Hot Off the Press. That's our new work series. We have our Wind Down Wednesday socials. We have our year-end celebration. That's also a fundraiser. But we've never thought in terms of an actual season, because we're not a theater in that sense, in the strictest sense of the word. But what we have done is, with our membership, people can get certain perks based on the level of the membership. And so that's how we sort of address what might be subscriptions for others, but for us, it's the benefits that people get at the level of membership.
Do you see live streaming as part of your future as you go in, like once we go back to live, like what you've done now? Like, do you see that as kind of an added on thing?
Oh, absolutely. We'll never be what we were. So people need to get that. They need to understand that theater as we knew it, live theater, will never be the same. The world will never be the same. However, there are so many wonderful benefits of what we've learned in the last year that we can now maintain. It can only strengthen what we offer. So I see it as very exciting.
That's great.
And also what we do, what I get encouraged by is, when early days of Twitter and kind of all social media, it was events like the Super Bowl or, you know, the Academy Awards. It was these live events that provided the live event for everybody to chat about, you know.
Mhm.
So I feel like the fact that we are, I completely agree, Adila, that we're never going back. But the fact that we are in the business of creating the live event, we're actually the content producers around which all this additional live streaming, because you're going to need events to live stream. The whole, I think the whole energy, one of the big energies around live streaming is, I've got to get my piece of it. I can't be in that city and see it. I can't be at the opening night of that Broadway show. I keep thinking about every show on Broadway that's going to reopen in the fall. Can you imagine what that performance is going to be like? I mean, I'm thinking about for Jack, but what is that going to be like when those actors take that stage and after, you know, 18 months of disruption, the first note of that overture plays and they hit that stage, and what? 1,000 people are going to get to experience that.
Right.
I think there might be 100,000 people who want
You're right.
to be
You're right.
watching. So,
It
like,
gives me goosebumps listening to you talk about it.
right? I mean, if we can't figure that out and raise the money for the industry around that, you know, that's my next crusade. Is how do we make that happen?
That's amazing. I kind of just want to end there.
I know.
Let's do it. Let's make it happen.
Thrilling ideas, yes, and projection of what the vision may be for us. Absolutely.
Yeah, and you guys have been on with us for an hour, and I really appreciate your time. There's lots of questions, and I'm going to collect them all. It's really great. I do want to be mindful of everyone's time, and I appreciate all the questions that came from this organically. And just, I am excited to see, you know, what the next 6 months, year, what we do with live streaming. I don't know if anyone, Amy, do you have anything else to add?
Listen, I will be there watching, you know, from Las Vegas, watching Broadway when it reopens. And I hope you all come and watch when reopen the Strip in Las Vegas at some point, and what, you know, and all of us, right, across all of our industry or our organizations when we reopen. But it's just such an exciting time. You know, I think we went through such a state of panic, Rachel. I think you used that, right? Panic and fear. And now we're on the other side, and there's so many opportunities yet to come that, to me, while I think initially I was scared and I was really dreading like what this would look like, it's now such a positive opportunity on how we're going to shape the industry for the future, that I really feel like, I mean, I feel like I'm a pioneer, and, you know, and somehow like we're going to look back on this and be like, wow, we did this together. So,
and in fact, we are pioneers. We're setting a new tone of where we're going to go. Absolutely.
And I really appreciate your insight and just your thoughts on all of this, because, you know, we really are, we're shaping the path for the future. So it's great to be able to have this conversation with you. And Wendy and I both, thank you so much for joining us today, everyone.
Thank you.
Thank
Shout out Stellar. Can we shout out Stellar?
Yes. Thank you. And Wendy, can you make sure that people know about the Los Angeles Women's Theater Festival that's happening tonight through the 30th?
Yes, Richard or Patch, if you can ping the room with the event, that would be great. And break a leg. I can't believe you're here.
Thank you.
On a day where you're opening the show. So thank you.
So join us, www.lawtf.org.
That's great.
Thank you, guys.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Bye.